Today I want to show you how I made these linen gym pants. Pause the video here for the materials list and feel free to use the chapters to jump around. Different countries have different paper sizes, but if you do it at 100% scale, it won't distort the size of the pattern. Also, printers can have a tendency to be a little bit wonky or shift the paper, but everything within this little blue outline is the actual pattern piece. So that way if your printer makes it a little wonky or lopsided, or if your paper size is slightly different, you're going to get the right size on your pattern. To assemble the patterns, cut off the bottom and the right side. Now when you lay it on top of the next piece, they will perfectly line up. The quickest way to do this is with a ruler and a knife. Next, you'll just have to tape the pieces together. You could also glue them. I find tape to be the easiest option. You can see that numbers are printed in the background, so that's how you know which page is which. I recommend going row by row. When you reach the end, it looks like this. So now you can cut out your pattern piece. Now you have to cut along this middle line here. However, if you have a wide enough piece of fabric, you could cut this as one piece, and I'll show you how to do that. So see these little dotted lines? These line up because those are the seam allowances. So you could attach these pieces together on that dotted line and then cut it out as one piece, but I'm going to show you how to do it as two pieces because you may not have a wide enough piece of fabric. You'll also want to cut these out as little notches so that when you're sewing the crotch seam, it doesn't get stretched out and you can match them up. And if you wish to make it low-waisted, you would cut along that dotted line. Otherwise, it's high-waisted. Okay, inside leg seam. We're all different heights. I want it to be the perfect height for you. To measure your inside leg seam, this is from that little bone on the inside of your ankle, and you're going to measure up to your crotch point of your pants. It's kind of a tricky measurement to get on yourself, but yeah, you're taking it up to that crotch point. I'll be leaving it at 78, but you can adjust it to the size of your inside leg seam. So if you wanted to cut it out as one piece, again, if you line up those little dotted lines of the stitching line, you can cut it as one piece, which I could do on this fabric, but for the purpose of demonstrating, I will show it as two separate pieces. Do a little snip where those notches are so that they're easy to match up later. You'll need to cut one pair for each pattern piece. So if you have a right side and a wrong side to your fabric, there will be a mirror image. I also recommend testing your machine on a scrap piece of fabric just to make sure that you like the way that the thread color matches and that the stitches are not too loose or too tight. We're going to sew a stabilizing stitch on all the inside crotch pieces. I'm just lining up the fabric with the edge of my presser foot, which is about 6 or 7 millimeters, and sewing the entire way along that crotch seam. This is just because curved edges, when they're like on the diagonal grain of the fabric, tend to stretch and warp. And then for even more support, you can press it with some steam on your iron, and it will just like make the thread shrink a little bit and just keep it all stable and together. So for all the seams, we're going to do French seams. That means you need to line up your pieces first with the wrong sides together. So with the wrong sides together, sew down the side seams with about a 6 or 7 millimeter seam allowance, which is just lining up with the edge of that presser foot. Next, trim that seam allowance in half. So it's going to be about 3.5 millimeters. Once you've sewn that, we're going to turn it inside out and press it. You might be wondering, what's the point? It takes longer. Yes, but this is the most beautiful way to do these seams. You must do French seams. They're so beautiful. There's no raw edges. It will be worth it. So you can see I'm kind of rolling the seam to get it to the edge and then pressing it. Now sew down that seam again with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So that's going to just encase that raw edge that we cut. So you have no unfinished edges on the inside of your garment. So that's how we do a French seam, and that little seam is going to be on the inside of the fabric. That was the side seam. If you cut your piece as one giant piece, then you don't need to do that seam, of course. But for the rest of us, that was the side seam. Now we're going to put the pant leg together with the side seam on the inside. The wrong sides are touching. As you can see, that's on the inside. We're going to sew along that inside leg seam, trimming it down to about 3 mil, flipping it inside out, pressing, and sewing it again with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. You can go back to earlier in the video where I showed you how to do the French seam if you need a little refresher. Both of these are the wrong side out. See, because that French seam is visible. So this is the wrong side. We've got front and front, back, back. So we're going to put the fronts touching together like this. Now that's the back. In the middle, these two are the fronts. And we're going to sew these fronts to the crotch. We're going to sew down, same as before, with the fabric lining up to the edge of the presser foot for that 6-7 mil seam allowance. And you can line up those little notches that we cut earlier just to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be. As we approach the middle of the crotch seam, you're going to see those little flaps of the French seam. Now, the stitching line is going to match up perfectly, but to reduce bulk, you're going to point them in different directions. See how one's pointing back and the other one is pointing towards you. So they're going to line up on top of the stitching line itself, but be pointing different directions. This is so that it's not bulky when you're sitting down, basically. So just keep sewing over that. You can check as many times as you need to make sure it's sitting the way you want. And keep sewing as you were the whole way up the back of the pants. This is the most confusing part of these pants, so just keep going. It gets easier from here. Go slow and make sure the notches are matched up. Once you've done that, you guessed it, we're going to cut down that seam to 3 mil. So this is what your pants should look like. That's that inside seam. Now to make it a French seam, we just do the same thing as before, except it's a little bit trickier because it's a curved shape, but just roll out that seam and press it. Look how beautiful that is. That's that perfect cross section of the two pieces with the stitching line down the middle and the excess pointed either way. So we're pressing all these seams because we're now going to go over and sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance to just completely enclose it. Our French seams are done, and I just love this finish. I think it's the most beautiful way to finish a pair of pants. So see the direction that each flap of the seam allowance was pointing? It's going to point the same way at the bottom hem of the pants. So just follow that the whole way down. And if you like, I would recommend pinning it in place. And we're going to sew a stabilizing stitch around the bottom hems of the legs and across the top hem of the waist. Like before, this seam just goes up to the edge of the presser foot. I'm using this non-roll elastic, and I like to pre-stretch it a little bit before measuring it. You'll need a piece that's the exact size of your waist measurement and 2 of your ankle measurement. You'll then need to go to your pattern piece and cut out a waistband piece which is 8 centimeters high. These rows on the pattern mark 8 centimeters, so you can just cut along that bottom line. If your pattern piece is in 2 pieces, you can fold it along that dotted line and match it up to the other dotted line to make this one piece. For the ankles, it's going to be different depending on how long your inseam measurement is. So just go up 8 centimeters and cut across, and that will be your pattern piece. After joining the pattern pieces along that dotted middle line as well, then cut these pieces out of your linen fabric. Next, you just have to sew this waistband piece the same way that you did the waistband on your pants. You do it the same way with the French seams. You can go back to earlier in the video if you need to see how that's done. Then with right sides together, sew the waistband onto the top of the pants with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. On the raw edge of your waistband piece, you just need to sew a line 1 centimeter from the edge, and that's going to help later when we fold it under. You'll be able to keep track of where that exact 1 centimeter line is. We can now fold the waistband right side out and pin stitch along the top. A pin stitch is just a presser foot width away from the edge, which is about 6 or 7 mil. I'm placing 2 pins approximately 8 centimeters apart with that raw edge folded under. I'm going to sew down that edge, making sure I'm not going through the pants, only the waistband. This is going to be an open section later. Now we're going to fold the waistband back onto the pants, wrong sides together, and stitch the rest of the waistband down, leaving open that little 8 centimeter pocket that we made before. And here I'm coming up to the edge, so I'm going to stop sewing there. This is what I meant. There's like a little opening here. I'm going to sew another line of stitching 1.5 centimeters from the edge of the waistband. This is going to make the top edge a little bit more fluted. Now it's time to put in the elastic. Attach a safety pin to the end of your elastic and insert it into that little hole. And you just need to caterpillar it along, pushing it forward, grabbing the safety pin, pulling the fabric back. I put a pin in the end of the elastic so it wouldn't accidentally pull through the whole tube. And I'm just double checking that it didn't roll, but it's non-roll elastic, so we're all good. It's just something you want to make sure before you sew it down. Place a piece of scrap fabric underneath the open ends of the elastic and zigzag closed. Now fold the scrap fabric over, and at this point you really can't do too much stitching. I like it to be super secure, so I went a little bit crazy. This little pocket here is going to allow me to change the elastic if it gets worn out over time. I suspect that the elastic will lose its stretch long before the pants are done. I'm just going to hand sew it closed with a needle and thread using a back stitch, and maybe in 10 years or so I can replace the elastic. If I change sizes dramatically as well, I can also replace the elastic to a new size. To tie off the thread, I like to go through that last loop 3 times and then pull it tight and hide the thread by going through the fabric and then snipping it off. And you just repeat the exact same process for the ankles. I'm 2 weeks into joining a calisthenics gym, and so far I'm really enjoying it, although I'm such a beginner. These pants are really comfortable. They're flowy, absorbent, breathable, all the qualities I love about linen, and I'm so happy with how they turned out. If you'd like the pattern, it can be found on my website, linked in the description box.